U-N-I-T-Y, U-N-I-T-Y, that's a unity, U-N-I-T-Y.
The traders hit upon a new strategy. Wars between African nations always meant captives for sale, so the slavers supplied arms to some nations and encouraged their kings to wage war on vulnerable neighbors.
So, in a way, or to a large extent, the slave trade depended, I think, heavily on the conflicts between the local African peoples.
When you study African American history, you know it's very interesting. Those of us who did come from Africa, because I understand that some of us was already here as Native American, but for those of us who did come from Africa, it's very interesting that a lot of the African tribes was rivals, was enemies, and because they was enemies and rivals, they was exploited by Caucasians. And actually, Africans helped catch rival Africans and help bring them to America. So now that we're in America, you know, one of the hot topics is African American unity, our unity, you know, us sticking together. My question is, in a culture of conflict, how do you keep unity? I mean, like, when you look at us African American, when you really analyze our lifestyle in America, it's like competition against each other. African Americans, it seems to me, is in constant competition with each other from youth. If you look at our way of life in America, is in constant conflict.
The slave trade depended on the conflicts between the local African peoples.
They exploit us fighting each other.
If you're in constant conflict with your own people, how do you keep unity? How do you get unity? How can you unify when you're in constant competition with your own ethnic group? You look at our music, our beloved hip-hop music. Hip-hop, a lot of hip-hop is based on competition. It's based on me against you, my lyrics against you. You look at our battle rap culture. We snapped on each other, ridiculed each other. Again, battle rap, me against you, you against me. You know, you look at the sports that African Americans are predominant in, like basketball, football. There's always me against you and you against me. And now even we got a new debate culture. Brothers like to debate now. You know, our intellectual debating. It just seems like everything is conflict. Me against you and you against me.
The slave trade depended on the conflicts between the local African peoples.
When do we agree with each other? When do we, you know, like as far as being African Americans, when do we work together and agree on things and build together? When do we build together? Because right now, today, all I see is us versus us. You know, almost everywhere, every aspect of African American life, I see VS, you know, versus. From my understanding, that versus is basically a division. It's divisive. It's division. It's dividing us. Divide and conquer. Most of the places I look on the internet, that's what I see. I see versus African Americans versus African Americans, brown skinned people versus brown skinned people. Even growing up in the world, you know, outside the internet, before the internet even started, African American life, a lot of it was who could get the better clothes, who could get the better girls, who got more money. It just seems like almost every aspect of our African American existence in America is versus each other. So the question becomes, when do we start adding? How do we start adding this point of view plus that point of view? How do we put things together? Let's start putting things together. This point of view plus that point of view. When do we agree with each other? When do we work together and agree on things and build together? I mean, some people might say maybe in the workplace, you know, you'll find African Americans who work together, agree on things and get things accomplished. But in the workplace, that's for the American system. That's for the American economy, which is why we was brought over here in the first place, to build the American economy. Is it that the only place that we agree and work and build is in the American workplace, building an American economy? Like, where do you see African American men agreeing with each other, building with each other outside of the American workplace? That's my question. How do you build unity? How do you keep unity in a culture of conflict? Because just like I said in the other video, if you're in constant verbal conflict, then you're just a step away from physical conflict.
First off, fuck your bitch in the clique you claim.
Verbal conflict a lot of times leads to physical conflict. So if we're in constant verbal conflict with each other, then we're just a step away from physical conflict with each other. And that's how we was brought over here in the first place, because we was in conflict. Our tribes, the African tribes, was in conflict with each other. So that's just my question for anyone who can answer. You know, how do you keep unity? Can you have unity? Can you keep unity in a culture of verbal conflict?
The slave trade depended on the conflicts between the local African peoples.
They exploit us fighting each other.
See, it's easy for us to say we want unity. We want African American unity. Are we willing to do what it's going to take to get unity? When will us African Americans form a way of life that we can agree with each other and accomplish things together? In order to get unity and keep unity, we're going to have to change our culture around. We're going to have to change things. It's easy for us to say we want unity. Are we willing to do what it's going to take to get unity?
UNITY.
Like, we can't come together to fight racism or to fight anybody else if we can't trust our brother.
You got two major issues supporting exactly what you said: an identity crisis and psychological homelessness. An identity crisis, an identity crisis, an identity crisis.
I think what the teacher said in this video has a lot of truth to it as far as us African Americans. The way I understand what the teacher said in this part of the video may be similar. So I agree with the teacher when he said we have identity issues or identity crisis. We definitely have identity issues. You know, a lot of us is doing great as individuals.
Black America is the richest black nation on earth. There's only 9 nations above us. We're number 10.
No, a lot of us is doing great as individuals, but as a group, as a collective group of people, I could count at least 8 to 10 different names or titles that we go by. 8 to 10 different names or titles that we call ourselves. One group of people going in 8 different directions, 10 different directions. There's no mystery of why it's difficult to unite. We have unity issues because we go on by different identities. And from my understanding, our identity has to do with our ego. Our different identities is the biggest obstacle to unifying, to unity. So thinking about the Black Spade days and the Black Panthers, even way before the Black Spades and the Black Panthers, there was Moors, there was Israelites, there was Asiatics. At that time, those groups were still relatively small in number. The overwhelming majority of us called ourselves Black, Negro, Colored. That was our basic primary identity coming out of slavery. Black, Negro, Colored. Black, Negro, Colored is basically one identity. It's basically the same identity. And because of that one identity and that same identity, we was able to move in one direction. We was able to have much more unity and move together as a unison. Our elders teach us about, the 40s and 50s, how it was much more unity, it was much more togetherness, moving as one.
Now, this is like 53, 54. Okay, if I'm going to the store, you get your boy, going to the store. Come on, walk with me. Okay, you did things together in unison. In the park, you walk down one end of the park, the other end was Italian. Okay, you went down to their territory, and even though it's a public park, there could be trouble. You did what you had to do just to survive, but we were more unified.
And the way I see it, it was easier for them to unify back in the day because there wasn't no discrepancy about who they was. They was black, they was Negro, and that was the end of that. Coming from the 1940s, 1950s, into the 1960s with the Black Spades, have Mike talk about how much unity they had. Back in the Black Spades days, they had a lot of unity.
Well, I'm saying to myself, when we were young, we stuck together like glue. Now it's all separation.
Nowadays, today, our people, we're more separated today because we got so many different identities. We got more education, but because of that education, we learned about this, we learned about that, we learned about different things in history. And when we learned about these different things in history, we started to cling and attach ourselves to different identities, and that separated us. Education sometimes can be a double-edged sword. We're learning more, it's separating us because we're going by different identities. It's powerful when you can study ancient indigenous cultures, when you can understand ancient African cultures, when you can understand, Native American history. It's powerful when you can understand various different other people in history. But one thing us African Americans seem like we have a tendency to do is that when we study these ancient civilizations, it seems like we start to cling to those civilizations.
Part of the problem with my people is they don't know who they are, so they think they everybody. At the same time, everybody knows that they ain't you.
When we study these ancient civilizations, it seems like we start to cling to those civilizations, trying to cling and attach ourselves to what we study. So we study it, and then all of a sudden we try to cling to it and we try to be it, instead of just being us. We are who we are first. We're here now and we are who we are now, here and now. The second big reason why I think us African Americans, we lost our unity, at least in New York, has a lot to do with Lyndon Johnson's Immigration Act that he signed in the mid-60s.
Congress passed and President Johnson signed into law the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1965. This act profoundly changed the flow of people coming into America. Hey, let's look at some numbers. From 1965 to 1970, immigration from Asian countries, especially Vietnam and Cambodia, quadrupled.
Yeah. 2 million over here. 2 million, they're taking everything. Too many fines. Too many. And they don't give a shit. They don't have no manners. None.
The unity today and back then is so much different. Back then we knew everybody. I mean, when I say knew everybody, we slept in each other's houses. We knew everybody's mothers. I mean, we knew each other. We slept on each other. We fought on each other. I knew your mother, your father, your brother, your sister.
I think that got something to do with it, Mike. How they started moving all these nationalities in, things changed.
No, you don't think that's what happened. That's why it happened. Exactly.
Why things change.
Yeah.
All these nationalities.
Yes, I don't call this the Bronx no more.
What you call it?
El Bronco.
Now, me personally, I feel like neutral as far as America's policies with immigrants. I feel neutral. I don't feel either way about it. I'm not pro or against it either way. Me personally, I feel neutral about immigration. To me, in my opinion, a lot of immigrants who come to America are hardworking, honest people.
I love Mexicans.
Okay.
Why? Because they're working people.
From my experiences, a lot of the ethnic groups that came over are honest, hardworking people. However, I think a big reason of why the African American community, why we lost our unity from the 50s and 60s, has a lot to do with immigration, has a lot to do with different nationalities moving into our communities, moving into our neighborhoods. This is about capitalism, so it's all about who can afford the apartment next to you. It's all about who can afford the house next to you. It's not about keeping your ethnic group together. It's about capitalism. So whoever can afford the apartment next to you is going to get the apartment. I think that's what happened. A lot of different ethnic groups started moving into our neighborhoods during the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s, especially during the 1980s and 90s with the crack era.
That's nice. That doesn't look like. Hey, that looks pretty, man.
And this is when everything started to blend in. When all the nationalities started to come, early 80s and 90s, all the nationalities, we all started to blend in, have sex with each other, take up each other's culture. And it just seems like our African American anthem changed. It just seems like during the late 70s and early 80s, us African Americans lost focus of our original motivation.
Remember when we came out, everybody went dashikis, afro, and saying peace, brother, and power?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It seems like back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, our motivation was to overcome by any means necessary.
See, we're going to be building. We're going to build a black nation that's going to be all wise and righteous.
Our motivation was freedom and liberation, African American independence by any means necessary.
To bring about the complete independence of people of African descent here in the Western Hemisphere and first here in the United States. And bring about the freedom of these people by any means necessary. And bring about the freedom of these people by any means necessary.
Now, the interesting thing is, during the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s, many of the African descendants, many of the African nations did become independent. Many of the Caribbean, West Indian islands did become independent. Between the 1960s and 1980s, many brown-skinned, woolly-haired nations became independent peacefully. From my understanding, a lot of the West Indian, Caribbean islands, Caribbean nations, they became independent peacefully. Like Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, didn't have to fight and shoot and kill to become independent. From my understanding, the West Indian Islands, their diplomats and their politicians or whoever, they did it diplomatically and they became independent from Caucasians peacefully. They didn't have to fight and kill. They didn't have to shoot. From my understanding, they did it from negotiating with Caucasians. Lady Elizabeth in England or Britain and France, the French, they negotiated with Caucasians diplomatically and they got independent. So it's just interesting that while us African Americans during during the 1960s, while we was in America following Martin Luther King's lead, integrating with Caucasians, that these other nations, these West Indian, Caribbean nations, these African nations, they was becoming independent away from Caucasians, away from Lady Elizabeth. For whatever reason, us African Americans never became independent.
Do you like integration? Or would you rather have your own nation?
After the late 70s, 80s, and 90s, it just seems like our whole motivation and our anthem turned around. With all the intermingling, with all the different immigrants and nationalities coming over, all the different blending in and everything, it seems like as African Americans, it seems like we lost our focus and we lost our original motivation. We lost our anthem of freedom and liberation. It seemed like we picked up the immigrants' anthem of getting American money.
This country, you gotta make the money first. Then when you get the money, you get the power.
It seemed like we picked up the immigrants' anthem of getting American money.
This the money game. This ain't the black man's game. This ain't the white man's game. This is the money game. We in the money game.
As a collective group, it seems like in certain ways we started to copy the immigrants and our mentality. It seemed like our African American anthem became about get money, get money, get money. It seemed like we took on the immigrants' anthem and the immigrants' motto, to get American money by any means necessary.
Before the money game, it's called the integrity game. And we've lost the integrity worrying about the money.
It seems like certain TV programs tried to program us to think that getting American money was our answer. Getting American money will help us overcome.
Well, we're moving on now.
You live in this apartment, right?
Uh-huh.
And you got an apartment in this building too?
Yes, that's right.
Well, how come we overcame and nobody told me? Well, how come we overcame and nobody told me?
It seems like certain TV programs tried to program us to think that getting American money was our answer. Getting American money will help us overcome. So as a collective group of people, it seemed like our motivation went from freedom and independence as a way to overcome. It seemed like that mixed around and turned into get American money as the way to overcome.
That's what they told us today. In other words, you still a slave. No matter how much money you got, you still ain't shit. No matter how much money you got, you still ain't shit.
What happens in our community, they've got us chasing the bag and not principle and not integrity. We're failing, we're crumbling, worrying about the bag and not the integrity.
Remember when we came out, everybody went dashikis, afro, and saying peace, brother, and power.
This country, you gotta make the money first. Then when you get the money, you get the power.
And also, it seemed like guns and weapons became more prevalent.
You wanna play games? Okay.
Say hello to my little friend. Wa-da-da-dang, wa-da-da-da-dang. Hey, listen to my 9mm go bang. Wa-da-da-dang, wa-da-da-da-dang. Hey.
Ruddock was born in St. Catherine, Jamaica during the early 1960s. Jamaica was a tough country to grow up in this era, with the gangs and drug dealers more or less running the country.
They then smuggle the guns to Jamaica, where they are used to control the neighborhoods through violence, intimidation, and murder.
It seemed like guns and weapons became more prevalent. They picked up certain things about our culture. We picked up certain things about their culture. It just seems like overnight it was a whole lot of different ethnic groups in our community. And I think that really shifted and changed things. So it's not as easy to unify when you have different ethnic groups in your community. It's not the same. They have a different relationship with America and they come up for different reasons.
So when you see other black people, right? Don't be stupid and think that's your people.
So they're coming in speaking a different language, different dialect, with a different culture, and they already got their preconceptions of us.
When you say black, there's a lot of black people out here now that's not us, like Dominicans. They got woolly hair and brown skin, but they're not.
It's 100%, but they still think they're better than us.
They already got their preconceived ideas of us, whether it's positive or negative, whether they're prejudiced, prejudging us. They already have their preconceptions of African Americans. So I think this was a big game changer. This really changed a lot of things around when a lot of different ethnic groups began to populate in our communities, populate in our neighborhoods.
When we were young, we stuck together like glue.
You know, and just thinking about the Black Spades, I think the Black Spades was the end of an era for African Americans in New York. In New York, the Black Spades was the last time that we had that unity, that solidarity. You know, they stuck together more. It was natural just to stick together, coming from the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
The Black Spades were the largest gang in Brooklyn. We had divisions in every single borough, plus divisions in Westchester County. So it was a huge thing.
They had that unity. You know, at the same time, I don't think they had total unity because they still had divisions. Within the Black Spades, they had a lot of different divisions that divide.
Let me ask you, is there anything you regret from the Spades?
Well, the only thing that I could really say is we start fighting each other.
Started fighting each other. What do you mean, within the first division, or you mean like division against division?
Division against division. Because every time we would have a meeting, we would hear it.
So you saying the various divisions, they used to fight each other?
Yeah. Black Spades on Black Spades.
Within the Black Spades, they had a lot of different divisions that divide. I think after the Black Spades, from what I understand, that's when everything started breaking down into crews.
The unity of the Spades in the 70s, what would you say broke that up? Was it
Time.
They got older, you saying?
Time. In 1974, I went upstate. I did my first bid in 74.
Okay.
And when I went upstate in 74, and when I came back, the Spades were gone. Now you had crews, and you had 140th crew. You had the Cypress crew. You had the Casanovas. Okay, the Casanova crew.
So in New York City, I think this is where more and more of the separation started between African Americans. So it was this crew with this identity, that crew with that identity. It was different identities. Everything broke down to crews. And when you got smaller crews, you got different identities. In New York, adding with that, like I said, it's different nationalities moving into our neighborhoods. And also drugs. Drugs played a part in our separation. You know, the crack era in particular. The crack era affected a lot of women. A lot of our women, you know, with the children. It affected the women and children much more than the heroin era. The crack also contributed to our separation, our family separation, you know, during that era. So all of this in one pot led to our confusion and separation and where we at now. But the OGs and elders before the Black Spades, they had more unity. Our people, African American people, we stuck together more. It wasn't no fussing on who we was. We was black, we was Negro, and that was the end of that. It's a very weak identity, but because our ancestors agreed on that identity of black Negro, it was easier for the elders to move in unison. It was easier for the elders to move together as one because they went by one identity. At the same time, the black identity is a very weak identity, and that's why it's falling apart. It's falling apart because the black man identity was built during slavery by people who wanted to oppress us.
Whoever shall harbor or conceal the said black will be prosecuted as the law directs.
The black man identity was made by those who wanted to use us and control us. Coming out of slavery, basically we had one identity, which was black, Negro, colored. And it's interesting because as we started to get more education, it seems like that's when we started to identify with other things. We got more education. We started calling ourselves Moors. We started calling ourselves Israelites. Then we started calling ourselves the Nation of Islam, the Tribe of Shabazz, Asiatic. All of these other names and titles we started to cling to as we got more educated, because see, the black Negro identity was a weak foundation to begin with, you know, because that came out of slavery. So that eventually had to get uprooted anyway. As we became more educated, the more we started to cling to other identities and the more separated we became. And it's interesting, the more education we got, the more we started to cling to other identities, the more separated we became. For example, some of us will support the African American Day Parade. We'll be out in Harlem celebrating. We teaching our children solidarity, to celebrate their heritage. We teaching our children all the positive things about being African American. Power through unity, culture, heritage, legacy. We got the beautiful women and children out. Thousands of us outside in Harlem celebrating. We all out with the balloons. We all out with the red, black, green flag. We repping ourselves as African American, glad to be African American. With all the stuff that we've been through in this country, you would think many more of us would come out just to show solidarity. With all the stuff that we've been through in America, you would think 8 or 9 out of 10 of us would show up at the parade to show the children unity, show the children solidarity. As much as we do that, some of us would say,
how can you be African American? How can you be the God and the devil in the same body at the same time?
I don't care if you think you a lawyer, if you a man, if you an African American, if you whatever the fuck you think you are. We thugs and niggas to these motherfuckers.
I'm not an African American. I'm an American.
So you got the brothers that say, no, we not African American, we just African. Then you got brothers that say, no, we not African, we really Native Americans. We was the indigenous people here on this land in North America. We didn't come from Africa. Then you got people who just want to say, I'm black. I'm not African, I'm not Native American, I'm a black man. Negro. Then you got the Moors who say, no, you're not a black man, you're a Moor. We the Moors, we the original Moors that taught the European Caucasian how to build the government. Then you got brothers who say, no, we Asiatic. The whole landmass was one landmass at one time in history, and that landmass was called Asia. And that brown-skinned man who walked on that landmass was an Asiatic man. You know, we got so many different names. Then, of course, we got the great Gullah people who say they're Gullah.
Gullah is the most authentic African culture in America. We think Gullah came from the word Gola.
And even though the original Kemet Tamaray culture is no longer alive, we see the remnants of the greatness in the pyramids. Some of us will even try to resurrect the old Egyptian culture. Some of us used to call ourselves Nubians. We used to call ourselves Duwabians. We call ourselves kings and queens. Some of us call ourselves gods. So yeah, we have identity issues.
Part of the problem with my people is they ass don't know who they are, so they think they everybody. At the same time, everybody knows that they ain't you.
And, you know, this is unique. Like, I don't know of any other nationality that has this identity issue. I don't see other nationalities with issues over their national names. I never see Jamaicans with issues over the word Jamaica. I never see Haitians with issues over the word Haiti. I never see people from Trinidad with issues over the name Trinidad. The only people I ever saw with an issue with their national identity was Puerto Ricans. To my understanding, some Puerto Ricans feel some kind of way about the name Puerto Rico because some of them say the name Puerto Rico came from Europeans who enslaved them. But see, the thing is, Puerto Ricans solved their identity problem because they said, okay, we're not Puerto Ricans, we Boricua.
Boricua, baby, thank you.
We Boricua. So they solved their problem. Boricua, they say, is the original name of the island before it was called Puerto Rico. It was called Boricua, Boriken. Even though our problem is a little more complex because, like I say, they got an island that they identify as a home. So that's why it's a little more complex with us. And this is why I speak upon African American independence.
African American sovereignty. Once African Americans are sovereign, we don't have no more problems. Or at least the problem will be then squarely on us.
You know, African Americans having a sovereign homeland of our own, because usually, you know, you would have a homeland and then you would name yourself after your homeland. You would name the people after the homeland. But because we don't have a homeland that we have dignity in, because we don't have a homeland of our own, and a lot of us feel some kind of way about calling ourselves American, we have this particular issue.
We don't have a homeland that we can go to or we can escape to. You know, this is like everything that we have is right here.
Exactly. So everything we have is basically in this melting pot. We're living basically in an American melting pot.
You simply melt right in. It doesn't matter what your skin. It doesn't matter where you're from or your religion. You jump right into the great American melting pot. Great American melting pot. Ooh, what a stew, red, white, and blue.
So it's even more complicated to come up with any kind of unity, any kind of oneness, agreements and oneness and moving in one direction. So we're living in this melting pot and it's based on capitalism. We can't really control who moves into our community. We don't control who moves next door to us. But even with that said, but still, where's the solution? Let's just solve the problem. Find some kind of solution to these issues, some kind of solution to these challenges, you know, so we can pass something constructive down to our future generations.
And that's what black people do. Always reanimating ourselves. Always reanimating ourselves.
Who are we? What is our official national identity? Let's build with a universal identity for us, a universal name that applies to us only. Our family's been in this country since the 1800s. A lot of us have Southern heritage. We're a blend between African tribes and Native American tribes. We're no longer just African and we're no longer just Native American. We're a unique blend of them.
We are our own people now. And a lot of people don't understand that. This is why you have people claiming to be Indians, claiming to be Moors, claiming to be Asiatic black men, claiming to be anything but what they are.
So even if you want to say you come from the original Olmecs or the original indigenous Americans or the original Africans, whatever tribes in Africa, those original brown-skinned Americans, those original brown-skinned Africans molded into a brand new people and became a brand new people here. Between the early 1600s and the late 1800s, a brand new people, a brand new culture was formed here.
The blending of all of those cultures that came together, during the transatlantic slave trade that gave birth to this culture called Gullah.
We've become a brand new people with a brand new cultural identity. We're no longer just African and we're no longer just Native American. Our cultural identity was born here. Our families was born here.
My culture comes from here.
This is where different tribes was forced to mate and have sex with each other here.
My people mean my blood, my culture. It has elements of cultures that come from other places, but my culture comes from here, Nova.
We shouldn't be ashamed to say that our family started here in the 13 colonies in the United States of America during the 1800s.
It's the music that belongs to us, so it's important that in singing these songs that we remember them.
I done done what you told me to do. I done done what you told me to do. I done done what you told me to do. I done done what you told me to do. Stay in the field, oh, stay in the field. Stay in the field until the war has ended.
Genetically, we Africans, right? We come from that continent, but we've been here for 500 years. We developed a whole different culture. We are the same people genetically, but culturally we're different.
Of course, our genetics and our DNA go back many thousands and thousands of years before this country even started. However, our family started in the 13 colonies and what became the United States of America. This is where our families formed, here. We shouldn't be ashamed of that. We already have a culture. We shouldn't have to go back to any indigenous culture and try to resurrect any indigenous culture.
Part of the problem with my people is they ass don't know who they are, so they think they everybody.
We already have a culture. We have our African American ADOS culture already. We can refine our culture today and make our culture just as great as ancient Egypt. We can refine our culture today and make it just as great as the ancient Moors. And the way I see it, the whole world has been feeding off our culture. Our African American culture, whether you want to call it hip hop or whatever it is, our style, our dress, the whole world has been copying that, imitating that, feeding off our culture already. Now it's up for us to refine our culture. We can refine our culture today and make our culture just as great as any ancient culture. You know what I'm saying? We could do it now, here today. We don't have to go back and try to resurrect some old ancient culture. We are who we are, and we're here now. So let's just be great now. Let's create a name for us and only us, a name that describes us. As many rhymes as we create and many things as we create, surely we can create our own name and agree on our own name going forward. I saw Umar Johnson talk about throwing a convention, some kind of conference for Pan-Africanism.
One of the conferences that we have to have, at the FDMG campus is a conference between immigrant Africans, African Americans, Africans from Europe, African Caribbeans, Africans from Asia, African Canadians, and we got to get in the same room at the same time and hammer out a unified platform.
But before we do all that, before we go and start joining other ethnic groups, before we make the same mistake we made in the Martin Luther King days, I think it's important that we get ourselves together first this time. This time around, let's get ourselves together first before we go and try to unite with other nationalities, before we go marry off into other nationalities. Even if they are brown-skinned, woolly-haired nationalities, I think it's important that we get ourselves together first.
We never had a conference. We never had a conference where we convene, where we establish our name as a people here.
I asked that, whether it's Umar Johnson or some other brother, popular, I asked that we throw a convention for us. We come to terms with who we are. Before we could join and unite with Africans, we have to first join and unite with ourselves. It's just the laws of nature. Whether we do this for ourselves or we do it for our future generations, to give our future generations a name where they can come together under one name, just like every other nationality got. Find some kind of solution so they can have some kind of structure. You know what I'm saying? We could pass something down, some kind of structure down to our children so they could be more confident, more unified, more together.
Before I let go.
You got two major issues. An identity crisis and psychological homelessness.